welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, here we are with our second half of the Stephen King 1979 TV miniseries, Salem's Lot. If you haven't already, you might want to go back to our previous episode and listen to the first half, because we did this movie in chunks.
Yep.
It's a 3-hour-long movie, so we did the first hour and a half as it was shown on television, and then now we are taking over from right when it was starting to get good for the second half. I think that what we kind of concluded from the last episode was that the first half was a little, it took its time. It took its time with exposition and pretty much setting everything up. And it really wasn't until a little over an hour in, if not arguably the very end of the first episode of Salem's Lot, did we start to really see stuff happen.
Right.
Scary stuff, I should say. Not that things weren't going on, but it was just a lot of drama between everybody. And I think where we left off was the kid, Danny, had been buried in the cemetery, and he had been, of course, bitten by his brother. Then the gravedigger, whose name was Mark or David?
Mike, I think. I don't know.
There's a couple Mikes in this. Yeah, it's all like Mark, Mike, David, John, Danny, Susan. These names are really forgettable. They're so normal and common.
But that's the thing about the first movie. Like, yeah, it's a lot of setup because there's a lot to set up. Like, there are so many characters to meet, and though many of them play relatively minor roles, they are all a part of the action and of what happens. And so it is a lot of setup. And then, strangely enough, once it gets to the action, it becomes far more focused on the central characters, and all of these other characters that, you know, they've spent so much time introducing just become a vampire feast. Like,
You're right. You're absolutely right. It's so much setup with all these intricate characters, and then it just ends up focusing on these same two or three. People just start dropping away one by one. I guess we got to know the victims a little bit. But what happens is this gravedigger Mike gets entranced by the coffin that he's burying of Danny, and he leaps in and uncovers the coffin, what little dirt he put on it, opens it up, and of course Danny's inside there, full-on vamp, glowing eyes open. I'm never going to get over this glowing eye effect, by the way. It's very effective.
no, it looks really good. Yeah.
It's awesome. Then he sits up and bites him, and that's how the first half ends. Where we pick up on the second half, we start off kind of focusing a little bit more on the boy. It's Mark, right?
Yeah, it is.
He's taking it very well that his two friends are completely dead.
Well, kind of. I mean, but his parents are worried about him because, I don't know, he's not reacting much at all, which concerns especially his mom. But his dad's like, you know, he's just like that. You know, he never really shows his emotion.
Yeah.
But they are concerned, and, you know, the dad tries to talk to him, and this kid is really into, like, monsters and horror and magic, and the dad is like, why are you so interested in all this stuff? And he's like, I don't know, I just always have been. That's who I am. And the dad picks up a set of handcuffs, and he's like, can you get out of these? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem, put them on me. And the dad does, and he, you know, pops right out of him, and then he's got some rope sitting right there. He's like, here, tie me up. And the dad's like, yeah, like, maybe another time. And the kid's like, no, seriously, I can get out of any knot. And dad's like, okay. But it plays in a very small way later, but a funny little setup.
I like that scene, though. Honestly, it was nice to have this scene at the beginning of the movie because it speaks to me. I was that kid.
Yeah.
You know, you were too, I'm sure. I was into monsters and horror and magic as well, very much into magic growing up. My parents certainly didn't seem very disturbed by it, even though teachers, I would write stories with Freddy Krueger in them, gory stories and stuff. I would write stories I'd show my parents that had killings and blood and stuff in them. And they really, surprisingly, weren't terribly alarmed by it. they would be like, maybe you want to tone back on this a little bit. And, there was even one time, I think, when the teacher I think it was my third grade teacher, had a meeting with my mom and dad, just saying, like, the subject matter of what he writes when he has these creative writing assignments at school always tends towards the dark. And my parents' reaction to it was, I'm really proud of them, was just like, okay. And then they came home and said to me, yeah, you might want to tone that down a little bit when you're at school. That freaks teachers out. Yeah, it freaks people out. But at the same time, my dad was renting horror movies for me, even though he didn't enjoy them particularly. I read Stephen King books and all this kind of stuff that I would get from the library quite openly, and they never expressed any concern. But I do think that there are a number of parents who do worry about their kids. Maybe just overall when we talk about horror, and I think we've brought up this subject before, people who aren't into horror sometimes don't get it.
They don't get it.
They don't. They're like, there must be something wrong with you. There must be some really deep, dark part of you, or something about your nature must be messed up that you enjoy these kinds of things. And my reaction to them is just like this kid's. It's like, I don't know why. I've just always been into it. Like, I can't even explain the appeal. I've just always been into it, and that's just been my thing. And it does appeal to me, but I couldn't for the life of you tell me why. And I like that the second part of the movie, of this mini-series that people are watching on television, the whole nation, confronts this a little bit. I don't know if it was a big intention, but I mean, the scene... It's a good 5 minutes of at least of the movie.
You see characters like this pop up in horror movies all the time. If I were to rack my brain, I'm sure I could come up with a million examples. But like the Monster Squad,
Fright Night. Oh, also real quick, Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2. Doesn't that have a guy who's really obsessed with horror in it? I can't remember.
I don't remember that movie very well. But you see it all the time. And the last time we talked, I talked about how Stephen King often writes about teachers and writers, because that's who he is. And I have a feeling that the reason that these characters pop up in these movies so often is because they are a reflection of the people who are making these movies, because obviously the people who make these movies love these movies. Why would you build a career in this field in particular? Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have careers that they don't love, but in this field in particular, why would you choose this kind of material if it wasn't something that you loved? And I imagine that probably, I don't know, Stephen King, writers, directors, actors who are drawn to this genre probably feel much the same way that we do in the way that this kid does. I don't know. I can't tell you exactly why. I've talked before how it's kind of like riding a roller coaster. It's scary, but it's fun because it triggers endorphins and kind of a chemical thing. Like you kind of get to live vicariously through these characters in these dangerous scenarios in the comfort of your own home, knowing that you are entirely 100% safe, but you still get to experience that rush through the characters, and maybe that's not it at all. I don't know, but I don't think I'm a sick person. I don't. I've never even been like in a fist fight. Like I don't have any inclination towards violence or anything like that. And I think that most people don't. But it is a misconception. I've talked about how my mom, she doesn't get it either. My dad was into it, still is, and I imagine that that's kind of how I got into it. But my dad's also into like fishing, which I could, care less about. So
which
it's
is
not
quite the opposite of thrilling. It's thrilling for like 30 seconds, maybe, if you're lucky.
I enjoy fishing with my dad because I enjoy being with my dad, and I do enjoy being outdoors, and I love the water and I love being on the water, but I'm more content to just let him fish, and I'll just sit there and read a book and enjoy the environment. It just doesn't do anything for me, and that's fine. But he's our little avatar in this movie. Plus, he's young. He's young, and I think that you and I, and probably many other people, look back on this age very fondly, where you're coming out of childhood, but you're still clinging to some of those childish things. In this case, and I know that we still do. I know you still do, especially. But the kid's into making models, and he's got all this horror memorabilia around. And I think that it's a kind of a poignant question. At one point, his dad says, "When are you going to grow out of this?" And he says, I don't know, someday, I guess. And to some
Right.
extent we do, and to some extent we don't. You know, I've been to your house.
Wait a second.
I've
What do you
seen
say?
your collections and stuff, and I think that's really cool, and I think it's cool that you've got, you know, all these comics and the complete DVD set of Tales from the Crypt. You don't grow out of that entirely, and I'm glad that we don't. We wouldn't have been doing this for 500 years if we did.
I mean, we're ones to talk, right? It's not necessarily a childish pursuit. It's just something we started
Right.
pursuing when we were children. And I doubt that, you know, people grow up absolutely having nothing to do with horror and then, like, by their mid-40s are suddenly enthralled by it. You know, I don't think it really,
Right.
it probably doesn't usually work that way. But another nice thing about having a character like this in the movie is it allows you to skip over a whole bunch of stuff. You've already got that character who totally gets it. He knows all the vampire rules. You know,
Yeah.
you don't need to convince him very hard about the existence of vampires, you know? And so he does become a key element in the second half, whereas he was almost completely absent from the first half of the movie.
That's true, and that's something that's different from the book. Mark is a key character throughout the entirety of the book, as I remember. And as I remember, Susan plays a much larger role in the book. And the priest, I don't even remember what the priest's name is, but he is relegated to virtually nothing.
Yeah. You don't even see him until the second half.
And I don't know what his name is, right? But like he was pivotal in the book, and I guess his character pops up in some of other King's work. I think that he's in one of the books, at least from the Dark Tower series, which, you know, just generally speaking, is another thing that I like about King. Stephen King has really built his own universe. And there are crossovers within that universe. And they're often very, very small, but for those of us who are devoted fans, they're really fun little Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Like Dick Halloran from The Shining shows up for just one chapter in it. And there are just other little references. And now that King's son, Joe Hill, has established himself as a very talented writer. I'm a huge fan. If you haven't read Joe Hill's stuff,
No.
you, Todd, and you listeners, it's great. It's not entirely dissimilar from his dad. He does horror, but it's more. I would say it's kind of more in the line of fantasy horror. Some of it, he does short stories, he does novels. Everything I've read of his, I really like. And he and his dad have done some crossovers. But one of the benefits of being Stephen King's son, it's really easy to license his properties. So
One would hope, right? One would hope.
right. So in Joe Hill's work, there's often a lot of callbacks and connections to his dad's work, and that's fun too. I can't recommend him enough. He's one of my favorite authors of the moment, and I've read almost everything that he's.
That's cool. Well, yeah, Dad just talks to him, and he's, you know, okay. And then the police have done some research. You know, they just some of this almost feels like quickly filling us in on the facts from the first movie in case we forgot.
Well,
You know,
right.
I don't know how much time passed between the first. Was it 2 nights, 2 subsequent nights? Was it 1 week, one week, and one another?
No,
week?
I mean
don't know.
it was right away because those reports come back. Like the constable had ordered reports on Stryker, Barlow, and Ben, and they all come back with no information, like
Yep.
nothing that we didn't already know, really. But then we see Ben and his teacher friend Burke at dinner, and they're just having kind of casual conversation. But then Mike, the gravedigger, like collapses on their table.
Yep.
They have him sit down, and he's out of it, and he says he's sick. He's got visible puncture wounds on his neck.
Yeah.
And he says, like, he doesn't know what happened. He woke up in the cemetery, like he must have slept there all night, but he doesn't remember. All he remembers is he heard singing and seeing bright, scary eyes, and he says, I remember a dream. There was somebody out there, and I let them in. And this becomes a motif as we see more and more townspeople, most of whom we know on some level, in this same state, dazed and confused, and they talk about having strange dreams, and they talk about people visiting them in the night, often people that we already know are dead. Like, for example, Mrs. Glick, Danny's mom, passes out at some point and says, Danny's been visiting me at night, and several other people say the same thing. What gets me and what I remember is that this happens really fast from this point on. Like, all of a sudden, everybody is getting turned. And Ben even explains that. Like, he's talking to Susan at one point. Susan has been gone. She went for a job interview at Boston and has been gone for several days. But she comes back as all these weird things are happening. In fact, like, Ben gets attacked by her ex-boyfriend just because he's a jealous butthole. But Ben gets put in the hospital. And when he comes out of the hospital, Susan greets him, and she's like,
Dad called me.
Oh. It was just a little knock.
I know you're okay.
There's more, Ben. Ned Tebbets died last night.
What?
They found him dead this morning in town jail. Dad examined him. Pernicious anemia.
It's just like the Glick boy.
Yes, only Ned had high blood pressure. And Danny's mother died this afternoon.
Same symptoms?
I think so.
What did your father say?
He wants to talk to you. And Jason Burke.
Jason Burke?
He's here, Ben.
Here?
In the hospital. Intensive care.
What?
Heart attack.
and there's a baby that's dead, and like there are bodies missing from the morgue, and your teacher had a heart attack, and he's in the ICU. Like it's just happens all at once. And as they kind of start to figure it out, because Burke had invited Mike to stay at his house since he wasn't feeling well, and Burke had noticed the puncture marks, and in the night he had heard, like, he calls Ben in the morning. He says, come over. By the way, if you've got a crucifix, bring it with you. So Ben comes over, and Burke's like, I swear, I heard him talking to somebody in the night. I heard him let somebody in. So let's go check on him. And so then they go check on him, and he's dead. And the window is open. And Burke said, I closed and locked the window. I'm absolutely 100% sure of it. And so but the puncture wounds are gone, which I don't really understand.
No, I don't get that either.
I'm guessing it's because he's now been turned full vampire, so like they have restorative properties or something.
Oh, that could be.
But then he disappears from the morgue, and he shows up and tries to lure Burke out, and he's really scary. The Mike vampire is really scary. But I guess because Burke kind of suspects what's going on, he's able to resist more than the previous people who didn't really know what was going on. And he doesn't look in his eyes, and he holds up a cross, and using the cross forces Vampire Mike out through the window. But this just keeps happening.
Yeah.
Butthole Ned gets attacked in jail. At some point, Mark is sitting with his parents and the priest. I think it's because they are so concerned about his fascination with magic and monsters. Oh, and it's also because Danny visited Mark to try to get him to come out.
Danny visited Mark, and that was creepy, but Mark had his crucifix snapped off of his little model he was working on.
Yeah, it was like a model of like a cemetery, right?
You know, he's too smart for this, but also you're wondering because these vampires can entrance people. But it seems like if you kind of know, if you more or less kind of know or suspect what might be going on, then you have an ability to resist this if you don't stare too deeply at their eyes. Who goes with Ben to see the priest before this? Oh, it's Ben and her dad. At some point, after Ned surprises Ben and beats him up, and then Ben talks to the doctor in the hospital.
Right, because the doctor is also Susan's dad.
Yeah. He and the teacher approach the doctor after their run-in with Mike. And, of course, the doctor doesn't quite believe him. Ned surprises Ben, beats him up. Ben goes to the hospital and talks to the doctor. He still doesn't really believe him, but he asks for a crucifix anyway, and he's like, I guess we can make that work. In the meantime, Jason is his teacher. He's reading up on vampires, and that's when he goes upstairs and has his encounter with Mike. But he ends up succumbing to a sudden heart attack. Is that something that Mike made happen, you think? Or do you think he was just shocked by the whole affair?
I think he was just shocked by the whole affair. We had seen him. He had been struggling seemingly with heart pains in the night. And then after the gravedigger died and came back and confronted him, he had heart pains again and apparently had a heart attack. He's an older guy, so I assume it was just natural.
That makes sense. Well, Ned ends up in jail. We just see another quick scene where he's laying in his jail cell, and his jail cell mysteriously opens, and he sits up. And this is the first time, I think, right, that we get to see full-on Barlow, the evil vampire.
I think you're right. It's just like a quick face shot. Very rat-like.
Blue.
Yeah, he's bald. Very prominent fangs, but they're not like his...
They're like his front two teeth.
They're not his canines. Yeah, they're like his front two, or they're closer together than you typically would expect of a vampire.
It's very much like Nosferatu. Yeah, I think.
But I feel like the first time we get a really good look at him is when Mark is meeting with his parents and the priest, because he has seen Danny, and he's told his parents, and they think that there's something wrong with him.
Exactly.
So they call in the priest, and out of nowhere, and for reasons unclear to me, the whole house starts to shake.
Yeah.
And then both Stryker and Barlow show up, just seemingly out of nowhere.
It's an odd scene, right? Because there's no, are they just on their rounds?
Yeah, it seems like they're targeting them for a reason. I guess the priest, but why? Like, the priest isn't on to them,
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on, but they show up, and we see at this point, we've seen Stryker a million times. He's just a regular guy, but now we see Barlow, and not only does he look strange in his physicality and his face, but he dresses like Nosferatu. Like, he's dressed like a bat, like in a cape and all black.
Yeah.
And he bashes Mark's parents. He bashes their heads together and kills them.
Yeah.
That's true to the book, too. I don't remember if that's exactly how they died in the book, but Mark is left an orphan. And it's a weird scene. It ends with, kind of, Barlow is holding Mark like in a chokehold, and Stryker says to the priest,
"What would you give for this miserable boy?"
What do you ask?
What would you give to reprieve him this night, to save him for another night?
What do you want?
The master wants you. Throw away your cross, face the master, your faith against his faith. Could you do that? Is your faith enough? Then do it.
And trust him to let the boy go?
They let Mark go, and Mark leaves, but he's like, he killed my parents. And he looks at Barlow, he's like, I'm gonna kill you. And then he runs away. And then there's this weird interaction between the priest and Barlow that ultimately I don't even know what happened.
Yeah. I'm not sure either. I guess we're just supposed to believe the priest died.
I guess. Like they just kind of look at each other, and Barlow starts to approach him, and the priest is holding up the cross, but it doesn't really seem to be having much of an effect, which I don't understand, because I feel like the cross works every other time.
Well, he says it doesn't work against the master. That's what Stryker says. Yeah, it doesn't work. Your cross won't work against the master. And Barlow grabs the cross and kind of bends it, I guess, and tosses it down on the ground. And I think that's where the scene ends, is with the cross on the ground, and then cut to commercial, probably.
Mm-hmm.
and then we're done. So, like, I guess the priest is out of the picture, and his parents are dead, and, Mark is allowed to run away. By the way, did you notice in the scene just before this when Ben and the doctor were meeting with, or whoever it was, were meeting with the priest, that shot of the castle of the church on the outside, that it had like a huge pendulum attached to a clock? Wasn't that bizarre?
It was weird. I've never seen anything like that.
It was clearly animated on there. I mean, I thought maybe for some reason that was going to have some significance later because it was such an odd thing. Why they went through the trouble of putting that in the movie for like 2 seconds.
Right. Apropos of nothing. I don't know. At this point, Ben has convinced Dr. Norton to examine Mrs. Glick, Danny's mom, because she has died. And it's funny because, like, the doctor, I mean, he's going to do it. And, like, he looks at her and he's basically like, she's the same as the other ones I've looked at. Like, she's not showing any signs of rigor mortis. Even though she is dead, she doesn't have a pulse. And he leaves to go get something. I don't know. But Ben is sitting there and he makes a cross out of tongue depressors, which I thought was kind of hilarious.
Yeah, and he starts reciting, Bible verses.
Yeah, and he says there are no atheists in foxholes, which is a phrase that I've heard before and I can only imagine is true. When you're in that big trouble, belief, no belief, you start praying just in case.
Do what you need to do, right? And sure enough, the body starts moving under the sheet, and he kind of stands up, and then the body sits up, and it's Mark's mother is turned, and she just sits there, and she almost looks confused, really, which I would imagine would be how you would initially wake up as a new vampire.
Yeah, it's Danny's mom. I don't know.
Danny's mom. Yeah.
I don't know if Mark's parents get turned or not. We don't see.
That's true.
But, yeah, I mean, when we had seen her before, when she had been in that kind of insensible state, and she had said that Danny had come to her and had told her that they could be together forever. And so when she wakes up, she's kind of calling to him. And she does seem a little confused. But when she sees Ben, then she's like, oh, I'm a vampire.
But thank God Ben made that cross, because he just approaches her. And Bill runs into the room at the same time, thankfully, so he can see this go down. And then he approaches her and presses that cross against her forehead, which burns it, as you would suspect.
Yeah, Evil Ed style.
Just disappears. Like, it just fades out in a really cheap effect.
Which I guess the cross killed her?
Yeah, I guess. I don't understand that bit. So you can kill them with the cross by touching them? I don't know. She just disappears. Literally just dissolves away. It's not a pile of ash or anything. She's just gone. After that, Ben runs to Susan, tells her you got to leave town. Susan never does leave town.
No.
She says she will.
Right. He says, by sundown, get your mom and as many other people as you convince to go.
And he and Bill are going to stay behind. I'm going to stay behind with your dad and help him fight. We're going to fight the vampires together. And Ben goes to the police station. This is the point where it's just like, there are just a couple more scenes to make you realize that pretty much everybody in town is turned.
Everybody.
He goes to the police station. The policeman's called in sick for the first time ever, and his on-duty cop there isn't looking so well, but he's complaining about visions that he had the night before. And it's like, oh, shit. Then he runs out, and Susan goes to his room, the room that Ben's been renting, and the landlady is clearly, mid-turn and talks about having dreams of her ex-husband visiting. For some dumb, I sort of feel unmotivated reason.
I don't get it. Yes.
Yeah, why? She just decides to go to the house. Like,
I know that this happened in the book, too, and I can only imagine that there was a reason, but in the movie it just seems like she's just an idiot. Like, not only just to go, but to go by herself. Like, what was her plan? What was her objective? Like, did she just want to look at the house? Like,
seemed like it, because she wasn't even going to stay. Like, as she goes, she steps out. It looks like she's going to approach it. Maybe thinks better, and then she sees some movement in the grass, and And, everything's kind of elevated. So she looks up and sees on the hill where the house is that, boom, there's Mark with 2 stakes in his hand running towards the house. So he's going to go and take care of business and fulfill his promise of killing the vampires, which is cool. And being Mark, as a magician and whatnot, an escape artist, he has a lock-picking set, which I thought was awesome. And he picks the lock quite quickly into the cellar and goes in, and she follows him in. But when she goes in there, like, he's gone. He's run way ahead. And so now there's just a lot of creeping around the house. And, she leaves the cellar and goes up into the main house. And the house is impressive.
I really liked this set.
Huge, yeah. The beautiful, and even the detail of just... It's a house that has absolutely been neglected for 20 years, and nobody's done anything to fix it up.
Right.
So there's just crap, dust in the air. There's dust in the air, which is a really nice effect.
Well, there's mold and moss, like, growing up the walls.
Everything, yeah.
And there's tons, like, the entire, like, decorative motif is taxidermy.
Like, to an insane degree, to the point where at one point Mark opens a drawer and it's just full of glass eyes that you would use in the animals for the taxidermy. It's nuts.
Another really cool touch that I really liked was there is a lot of taxidermy, and there are heads of deer or other animals with antlers on the walls. But within those antlers are the corpses of other animals, like dogs, and in various forms of decay, like some that look like they've been killed only recently and some that are like all bone. And I wasn't really sure what to make of that. I'm like, it looks amazing. It looks super creepy, and I love it. But I didn't know if that was supposed to suggest that, like, they were Barlow or somebody was feeding off of these dogs. I'm not sure, but it looked great.
It's hard to pick apart, like, a backstory, to kind of fit why there's so much taxidermy around here and dead animals. It would have been nice to have had a line or two in the movie that might have foreshadowed this or kind of explained it a little bit, but presumably it was a previous inhabitant, right? Certainly Barlow and Straker didn't have enough time to do, or inclination to do all this stuff.
One would think, but then there's all, in the first movie, the caretaker, the cemetery guy, had a dog, and it was killed, presumably by Straker, but never. We don't know why. And I read something that, like, if you look closely, the dog is near or underneath a tombstone that is maybe Hubie. Is it Mantle? Is it the Mantle House? Is that what it's called?
Marston House.
Marston.
Yeah, Hubie Marston.
So maybe it was some sort of sacrifice. I don't know. It's never explained, but dead dogs, I don't know. But the house looks cool, and they're both in there, and they're just kind of snooping around separately.
Yeah.
And the whole, like, Mark's a kid, so I'll give him a pass, for being impulsive and not terribly bright. He thinks he's avenging his parents. I get that. Susan's a grown-ass adult and has been presented as being intelligent.
But not here.
Right, but no.
Yeah.
And, like, she's not even discreet. Like, she's just walking around in this huge house like, Mark? Like, well, okay, or the vampires? Like...
You're in someone else's house. Come on. and then Ben and Bill show up.
Well, yeah, but first, they're separated at first, and then they find each other. But as soon as they find each other, they hear noise in the house, and Mark's like, they're here. And so Mark goes into a room where he heard noise, and Susan is outside, and he's not responding to her. So she goes in there, and she sees that Mark has been knocked out by Straker, and Straker leads her away. And I got the impression that he was kind of able to entrance her as well, and just leads her away.
Yep.
And then Stryker ties up Mark in a chair, and he's like, "What have you done with Susan?" And he says, I took her to what she came here for. I took her to meet the man she came here to meet." And then, like the constable is leaving town, and Ben like chews his ass, like the whole town's in trouble, and you're leaving. He's like, "Yep, I'm getting out of here." But he gives Ben a gun, and then it cuts back up to Mark in the house, and he frees himself from the knots, which we knew he could do because he told us earlier. And then that's when Ben and Bill
show up.
they talk about the fact that Susan has not shown up to get her mother out of town, and they go to the church, they collect holy water, and then they head up to the house. And I guess this is the finale.
Now they go through the trouble collecting the holy water. Is the holy water ever used?
No, in fact, he drops it and breaks it, like right at a pivotal moment.
Right at a pivotal moment. That's right. Idiot. So they go into the house, and there's more creeping around. They run into Mark. Mark's trying to leave, but then Mark kind of comes back in. And anyway, there's just a lot more creeping around, and Bill goes up the stairs. And this time, which I just swear that we never saw it when she went up the stairs, and we had a shot in that direction. Anyway, this time when he goes up the stairs, he turns and looks to the right, and the hallway ends in just a wall that just has antlers sticking out of it every which way. And so then there's a door creeps open and shuts, and there's noise. And so he slowly goes to this door. Straker is behind the door. He opens it and just starts walking very deliberately towards him. Bill does nothing but back away maybe 2 small steps. And Straker, with this sort of superhuman strength, grabs him by the shoulders, lifts him off his feet, and walks him straight into those antlers, just completely impales him. This is the other scene that I remember as a kid. As a kid, I remembered it as the vampire doing this. But actually, it's Straker. And as a kid, this shocked the hell out of me.
It's pretty graphic for network television.
It is, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. Now, I mean, sadly, while he's like kind of hanging there, and we see that shot, which is pretty graphic, like already like the fake prop antlers are kind of bending a little bit.
I didn't notice.
It loses a little bit of its luster the longer the screen lingers on it, but it's a cool thing. And this was a change from the book. As I remember in the book, instead of this happening, he actually falls through the floor and gets eaten up by rats.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. And so then Straker very slowly grabs a post and comes down the stairs towards Ben and Mark. And Ben just opens fire on him a bunch of times. And at first it doesn't seem to affect him, but then he slows down and he falls and dies right there on the stair.
It's a little bit anticlimactic. It's a little anticlimactic for his character. But at the same time, I kind of don't get it, because in Fright Night, the main vampire's familiar also had superhuman strength and was hard to kill, but ultimately, didn't it turn out he was like some other kind of demon or something? Like, he wasn't human either. I had assumed that Straker was human, but he's able, with no trouble at all, to pick up a grown man into the air.
Yeah.
And then he endures a whole pistol's worth of rounds before finally falling down and dying.
But he dies,
Yeah. He had talked about how he and Barlow had been partners for a very long time. So I don't know if it's just Barlow's influence or what it is, but maybe he's got some supernatural abilities, maybe including long life. I don't know. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because he's dead now.
He's dead. It's really anticlimactic. I really was disappointed in that.
The whole thing really is kind of anticlimactic.
It's true. The ending is a bit of a disappointment, because after this happens, then sun's going down soon. We need to go find these vampires. So they go into the basement. The basement stairs have been knocked away. So they kind of fall, and Mark injures his foot, but that doesn't seem to matter. And then they poke around very slowly around there a little bit, and they find basically a compartment. That's when he drops his holy water while he's trying to break the padlock off of it. And when he opens it up, they look inside, and there's the big long coffin and a whole pile of vampires just sleeping every which way in there.
It's a nest.
I imagine in the book, because I don't remember it very well, but I imagine in the book there must have been like half a town's worth full of vampires in there or something.
Right.
I think the movie is supposed to give the impression the town's overrun, but it doesn't give a good job of it because we've only seen a dozen or so characters, and though we see them get picked off and the cop leave town, there's no sense, there's no grand shot or anything of an empty town or of anything like that. It's just those 12 or so characters that we saw previously who are there.
Yeah.
It's just sort of a limitation of the budget,
right.
I guess.
If I do remember the book correctly, it quite literally was virtually everybody in town had been turned. Like this was now a town of vampires.
But you never know it from the movie, really.
Right.
I mean, you could imply it, sort of, but...
I know that in one of Stephen King's short story collections, there is a continuation. It's not really a continuation because it doesn't follow the same figures, but Jerusalem's Lot is still known as a town of vampires, and people stay away from it. And of course, in the story, some dummy doesn't stay away from it, and that's why it's a scary story.
That's what makes it a scary story. Otherwise, that would be an interesting story, wouldn't it? Oh, the vampires are going to the supermarket. The vampires are, meeting each other for coffee at the coffee shop. A little bit of less drama there. So then they pull out the coffin, and they open it up, and he's in there. And they're like, oh, the sun's going down. But... well, the vampire wakes up, but he isn't able to do much. He kind of reaches out, but by now Ben already has a stake up against him. Mark runs towards him to help or something, and he's like, no, stay away. And he flings him across the room, almost with a superhuman strength of his own. And Ben whacks himself against a table and sits there with his back to the opening where all of these vampires in there, by the way, are waking up and crawling ominously towards him.
I think that was my favorite shot because
it was cool.
They're crawling out of the dark, and not only are they crawling out of the dark, but the camera focus is on Mark. So they're crawling out of the dark, but they're also in fuzzy focus. And we can recognize them. These are people that we know. Mm-hmm. They're like cats. They're creeping up really slowly.
And idiot Ben's back is totally to them.
Mark, eventually, at the last moment, I don't know if he hears something or what, but he turns around and closes the door and is able to lock them in there.
So disaster averted.
And just talking about it and thinking about it, in the moment, I wasn't thinking about it as much, but it really is very anticlimactic, and I don't remember the book feeling that way. I felt like there was a lot of build to a climax in the book, and here, he quite literally just pulls the coffin out, opens it, and stakes him. That's it.
Yeah,
there's no, Barlow's supposed to be this presumably centuries old
master
being.
vampire.
He didn't seem very hard to take out.
No.
Find him, pull his coffin out, stake him, call it a day.
And that's basically what they do. They run out of there, and they light the whole house on fire, and then they end up in a car and driving away. And Mark says to Ben, what are we going to do now? And Ben's basically like, we're going to drive them out. Now, again, the implication that there are many, many more in the town. Mm-hmm. We'll drive them out of their hiding places. We'll purify Salem's Lot, and the others will be on the run. The others, of course, also including Susan. Mm-hmm. So,
right. Well, that was something we haven't seen her, and I thought that was really kind of strange. And again, I don't remember how it plays out in the book, but
where'd she go?
She just disappears, and we don't know what happens to her. I mean, ultimately, we kind of do, but the whole time, when he's setting the house on fire, he looks up and he's like, "I'm sorry, Susan." I guess presumably she's in there, but it just she feels like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Really, in the whole movie, she feels kind of like an afterthought. She's not important. She doesn't do anything.
But she's always there. You're right. She just doesn't do anything. It's so sad, really. And then we come back to what we saw in the very beginning of the first episode, which was 2 years later in Mexico when they're at that church and they had just filled their vials with holy water and it lights up and they say, oh, they're near or something like that. And I guess... where are they going? Or do they?
I don't know. They go to Luke Skywalker's house on Tatooine.
Oh my God, you're right. Just
they go to this kind of adobe place where they're staying, I guess. And Mark like stays in the living room, just standing there, and Ben walks into the bedroom where there's just like a small bed or a cot or something. And Susan is laying there in all white, looking very, very beautiful, like she's posing for a painting or something, but her eyes are closed.
Eyes closed, yeah.
And as he approaches, she's like, I've been looking for you for so long. It was so hard to find you, but now I found you and we can be together. We can be together forever. That's his promise. And she opens her eyes and she's a vampire. And it kind of seems like, she's enchanting him and he's coming closer and like they're going to kiss. And, it looks like she's, preparing to bite him. But we see him raise his stake up behind him and he stakes her.
It's smart, I guess, to try to end this on a sad, emotional, kind of tragic scene.
I don't remember exactly how it happened. I don't think that this is how it happened, but I do know that Susan was turned in the book, so she was lost.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember how it ended, frankly. I do remember that it was that frame, where they did come back, and it seems. And then so Ben tells Mark like there will be more of them. And so, we're left thinking that they are just going to be
devoting
on the
their
run.
lives. Yeah, they're like the Van Helsings of the Stephen King world,
Yeah,
just,
right.
So it's, again, a very anticlimactic. I'm with you on that 100%. I was so disappointed in the ending. It's just how easy it was. I mean, it's just like, oh, okay, now we've all finally figured out they're vampires and they're up at the house. Let's all go to the house and stake them, and then they do.
Well, yeah, and it's unfortunate because, we talked yesterday or last time we talked about how, there was so much setup, and I assured you that the second part was better, and I do think that it's better. There's more action, there are more scares, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on here that is really spooky. The vampires are scary. They're scary looking. They're a menacing presence. Just the notion that this is spreading so fast. And Ben describes it. He's like, it's, first there's one, then there's two, then it's 2 times 2, then it's 4 times 4.
Exponentially, right?
It's a disease. I mean, it's just spreading like a disease. And that idea in and of itself is frightening. And so I enjoyed the second movie. The ending is just, it's a little lackluster. Like at the end I was like, oh, that was stupid. I hated it. But
Yeah.
It was a little lackluster, which is too bad, because overall I think that this is a pretty good movie for a made-for-TV movie from 1979.
Yeah, not bad at all.
It's pretty good. No, it's not bad at all, and it's atmospheric, and it's pretty faithful to the source material, which I also enjoyed. It's not amazing. I don't love it. I wouldn't cite it as one of my favorite movies, though there are, film directors out there who do. But it's a good story. It was remade in the 90s, again, as a made-for-TV miniseries. Rob Lowe starred as Ben, and I don't know who else was in it, but I'm sure lots of notable people, because that was the trend.
Was that the Return to Salem's Lot, or was that a true remake?
This was a true remake. There was another movie called Return to Salem's Lot. I don't know anything about it. I do know that this miniseries was so successful that they considered extending it to
like a
series. Right.
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen. But there was Return to Salem's Lot. Then there was the made-for-TV remake that follows the original story, and there's a new remake in the works right now. I mean, it looks like it may be done. Directed by
it's supposed to release this year.
Yeah, directed by Gary Doberman, who also wrote the screenplay. Not a lot of super recognizable names, aside from Alfre Woodard is in it, playing a character that I don't remember. I'm looking at the IMDb page, and one of the things that I really like about it is that it's far more diverse than this movie. I don't think there's a single person of color in this entire movie.
No, not at all. Not even a slightly
like in the background, nothing.
European person or something in there.
Yeah. So it's nice to see a wider variety of people.
Far from a lack of diversity, the town policeman has never heard the word chow before, apparently. I loved that little scene, was so cute.
Bye. Ciao, Constable.
Ciao?
Ciao? That's a familiar Italian expression meaning goodbye.
I didn't know you were Italian.
I'm not. The word is.
Well, you learn something new every day.
Well, you learn something new
moron.
every day. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. It's fine. I'm glad that we got around to doing it. I think it's worth talking about. I think it's worth seeing. It's not going to knock your socks off, but especially if you're a Stephen King fan, or if, like us, you were a fan of these event miniseries from the, especially like the 80s and 90s. It's what you would expect it to be. Mm-hmm. And it's nostalgic, and overall I enjoyed it.
And I would say, too, if you're looking for something with a mixed crowd, or like maybe watch with your family if you have younger kids.
Yeah.
Some of the imagery in here would be pretty frightening for a kid who's a little too young.
Sure.
You might have to deal with some nightmares, but ultimately it's pretty tame as far as it's not graphically showing anything. And,
really.
it is well paced, or slowly paced, I should say. So yeah, it would be a good option perhaps to watch with a family,
Sure.
PG as it is. So, well, thank you again for listening to our episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us just by searching Two Guys and a Chainsaw Podcast, where we have our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, website, twoguys.red40net.com. Just leave us a comment any one of those places. We also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Chainsaw Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please consider supporting us over there. We have some freebies for you, an exclusive interview, some mini-sodes that we put out a couple times a month, and also access to the unedited versions of our recordings, as well as some influence over what movies we're going to do next. We just take our requests and we pull them over there to decide which one we're going to do next. Until next time, I am Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.